yes, our topic tonight is so relevant and so timely, and I'm really excited that you're joining us. And thank you again to the School District of Springfield Township. Just love working with all of you. Your staff and your families are amazing. I know not everybody here is in the Springfield Township School District region, but welcome to you as well. The follow-up page for tonight is conversation.zone. By the way, our website has loads of supportive information. But if you go to /addiction, that's where we're going to find what we're talking about tonight, which are basically process addictions. Addiction is a really heavy word for this, but I just want you to know that we want you to find all the resources that you need, and that's where they are on that page. Lots of follow-up information. So now I'm going to tell you about our very special presenter tonight. We're so excited that Lizzy is back at the School District of Springfield Township. Lizzy Lopez is the Director of Clinical Operations at Synergy Recovery Houses. Lizzy found her passion for helping others through her own personal experience with healing and recovery. After receiving her master's in clinical counseling, she started her career working with adolescents struggling with substance use and mental health issues. She then continued her career path working with young adults who had several treatment and recovery attempts. She believes in the importance of education within the community and is a speaker on topics such as boundaries, addiction, and navigating treatment. Lizzy utilizes her experience and training as the foundation for the creation of the treatment programming at Synergy. In her free time, Lizzy enjoys spending time with her husband and making forts with her two young children. She also likes to adventure in the outdoors, exercise, and be spontaneous. Yay, Lizzy. So glad you're here.
Oh yeah, I appreciate the intro. It's always interesting hearing your bio like read back to you. So, but I always kind of like reflect when I hear my bio, and what came up for me is like tonight we're talking about the 21st century teen, and I started my career about 10 years ago in the field. Primarily with adolescent work. And just in that 10 years, the landscape has changed so much, and what we're seeing now is it's different, right? And so a lot of when I think about presenting on this topic, it's like really kind of getting parents educated for the relevant information so the intervention or the tool matches what we're seeing now. And that's changed in 10 years. I think about the substance use, the technology, the vaping, all of that kind of stuff just in 10 years that's rapidly changed. So really staying up to speed on what we're seeing is important. If, you want to have an intervention that's successful or a tool that's, one of the more effective ones. So I'm going to share my screen. Let's see if I can do that. Yep. All right. Um, so as Kim mentioned, I'm the director of clinical operations at Synergy. It's a sober living house with a structured clinical program attached to it. We do specialize in older adolescents and young adults. So the population that I'll be speaking of, it's all the stuff we see. And the stuff that we're actively working with for our clients to really improve the quality of their life. So when I think of like the 21st century teen, the quality of their life, in my opinion, is not that great. And it's really hard. Like it's hard to be a teen right now. It's hard to be a young adult right now. And I think there's a multitude of reasons, but the things I'm gonna focus on tonight is really the stuff that was listed, right? And so when we think about the stuff that's listed, it's relationships, it's substance use, it's screens, it's phones, it's gambling, it's video games. And I kind of like was thinking, what is that in a nutshell, right? If there's like a theme, what are we looking at? And it's distractions. So when we think of the 21st century teen, we're really thinking of like people that are growing up in a culture of distraction. So here's just some things that I found to be helpful to kind of reference. But research indicates right now that the average person's attention span on digital devices has decreased approximately 2.5 minutes to just 47 seconds today. So, where I'm at, like we see a lot of diagnoses of ADHD. We see a lot of diagnoses related to just attention span issues. And a lot of this is further implicated because I'm not saying somebody might not have that diagnosis, but also the way that they're consuming technology is shortening that attention span. So it's definitely not helping if somebody has that. And overall, I think if we're all honest with ourselves, we've experienced that as well. So a lot of also what I would like people to reflect on is like when we talk about parenting and what are the tools, a lot of what we're going to ask parents to do, and it's a lot of what we ask parents to do in our program, is assess their own behaviors with these things. Because if we're not modeling what we're asking our kids to do, like that's a hard message to receive, especially for an adolescent that can weaponize information because they're good at that. And so, the attention span thing, I think it's relevant for teenagers, it's relevant for adults. Um, there's cognitive function concerns just with what we're seeing with like this distraction. So, excessive consumption of online content. So, think any of the social media platforms, even think like YouTube, um, often termed brain rot, has been associated with reduced gray matter, impaired memory, and diminished attention spans, as I stated. So I don't know if parents are like familiar with some of the trending terms. I know Kim does a good job of sort of like keeping people up to speed on these terms that people use. But brain rot, I mean, if you Google it, it's a trend, it's a hashtag, it's a Instagram page, it's a TikTok page. And so this term actually that is meant to kind of mean that like look, when you're like engaging in it, you're in this hole, right? Like there's another term called doom scrolling, and it's when you get sucked into this online content and you start to lose track of time, and then the next thing you know, it's been like 2 hours. But that's the decrease in like the cognitive function, right? And so like even if you look on the content online, it's playing to this term in a way to draw people in, especially teenagers, and they can get sucked in very easily. I always tell my clients and I tell my parents that people that write these algorithms generally are much smarter than me, and they know how people function, and they use psychology in a way to sell a product. And if the product is something that's online, the idea is to keep you on it, and there's different ways they can do that. And then, there's this whole thing tying into like in general, there's this increased boredom that children and teens are starting to experience. So, um, people are generally disengaging just 33 minutes after returning home from school, with increased screen time and constant digital engagement. So, what is happening is because there's all this consumption, because there's this culture of distraction, we're starting to see boredom levels increase, and that's directly tied to dopamine. So, if we're looking at the brain and how the teenage brain is developing, dopamine is something that we always tend to focus on. And so, when we're inserting these high levels of dopamine dumps through these various methods, what happens is tolerance builds and then boredom levels increase because what you get enjoyment from tends to not be as enjoying as you constantly consume, right? And so there's some good books out there and there's some information in my slide deck, but Dopamine Nation is one of my favorite ones for parents to read, where it really talks about like what's going on here, from a scientific level and like what we're seeing in people's brain. And so, like, if you think about this for the teen, like, there's so much emotional dysregulation that's going on in general, right? Because of all the things that we're talking about. And then if they're using these dopamine hits from online content, from nicotine, from substances, from all of these things, what's happening over time is like they're not learning to tolerate distress. And so this all plays into some of the other things that I've presented on before with like, the failure to launch program, where it's like if kids are not developing distress tolerance and they're high, there's these high levels of boredom, what's going to happen when the kid gets sent to college or they move out of the parents' house after high school and they experience distress and they have no tolerance for it. So these are all kind of like if you think of how everything is tied together, you can kind of paint a picture of somebody's capability and their prognosis really on like independent living based on some of the behaviors and some of the things that pop up, and are they moving in a certain direction where they're developing tools and skills, are they using social media, online content, substances to regulate their system for instant relief, but long term that's going to create an issue. um so a lot of what we're seeing is just like there's an insane amount of access right now. I tell people like our primary thing is substance use where I work, and a lot of people lately have been asking, especially with the young adult male population, are we seeing an increase of gambling? And of course we are, because sports gambling is now something that you can do on your phone if you're over 18. And with the commercials and with the sports and all of these things, there's this whole marketing ploy. So, when people get sober, they can move to the next thing because they're still looking for that dopamine hit. And so we're seeing gambling pop up now because there's access now. Um, so, some statistics to kind of look at is like smartphone ownership. As of 2022, 95% of US teens reported having access to a smartphone. That's a significant rise from 73% in 2014 and 2015. Daily internet usage, approximately 96% of teenagers go online daily. I mean, I don't think that should be really surprising to anybody. I'm always also kind of curious, like, who's the 4% that doesn't? But the thing that kind of stuck out to me when I was looking at some of these stats is like 46% report near constant internet use. And that's up from 24% in 2015. So, there's been clients that I've had where I'll have them look at their screen time report and then we'll factor it out over a course of like 3 or 4 years. And I'll show them how they're spending a considerable amount of their life online, whether it's on TikTok, whether it's on, gaming apps on their phone, different things, to try to get them to see the information. Because if we know that there's about half that are reporting near constant internet usage, that means that there's a significant amount of data if we look at a screen time report to support that. And a lot of the clients we're seeing that have substance use issues, when we look through their timeline, it typically started with a screen addiction when they were like 13, 14. So when we kind of piece together a timeline of like, where did these behaviors start and where did you start to learn how to soothe in a way with something outside of yourself that provides dopamine relief, a lot of times in a timeline, we can trace it back to social media or video game usage. Social media usage, I mean, teens are spending over 3 hours daily on social media. Well, teens that spend over 3 hours daily on social media face double the risk of experiencing mental health problems, including depression and anxiety. Once again, to me, that's not shocking. I think what we know about social media usage, especially for the developing person, is it creates high levels of comparison with, these depictions of life that are altered and filtered and all of these things. I also will see trends on TikTok that will then like make their way into my office through a conversation with a client where it's like, this week everybody on TikTok is diagnosing themselves with like a personality disorder. So all the clients all of a sudden start thinking they have that diagnosis. I've seen that 2 or 3 times. Or, I've seen clients with eating disorders. And if you go on TikTok, there are platforms and users that actually glorify. And there are trends and hashtags that glorify an eating disorder and restricting behaviors. And so a lot of times my clients that struggle with these things will follow those pages, getting inundated by those messages, reinforcing their belief system that's leading to, the things like depression, anxiety, social isolation, avoidance, maladaptive behaviors, whatever it might be. There's a study that found 56% of teenagers believe that they can easily encounter disturbing content online. That, once again, that's not shocking to me either. When I was in session with one client and I stumbled upon the brain rot thing, I was like, oh, this is kind of crazy to look at as an adult. And it was like, old news to the clients when I was like, do you guys know about this brain rot thing? I mean, like you would have thought I was like a dinosaur when I brought it up. So I think the amount of access and the type of content that's being pushed out on different platforms, a lot of it is disturbing in nature. Um, and then when you see the developing brain and their lack of a prefrontal cortex and the way that they make decisions, it's not shocking that they're drawn to this content. And once I'm sure people know how this works because you guys probably use social media too. Once you click on a couple things of a theme, right? The algorithm starts feeding you more and more information. So it gets harder to then take that off of what you're exposing yourself to. And overall, because a lot of this social media use, substance use, video games, all of these things that we're seeing, there's just reduced in-person interactions. And what we know, right, is like the way that people can actually generate happiness in their life is like largely tied to their social connections, their interpersonal relationships, and the amount of bonds that they can kind of term as intimate, right? Like people that we can actually share ourselves with and be seen. That's directly tied to long-term happiness. So if we have a population like an adolescent population, like a cohort that is struggling so much with mental health issues, and we know that, right? And then we had COVID, which created an immense amount of isolation and avoidance where these behaviors were reinforced outside of their control. And now we have these things like social media or video gaming or this that are also reducing in-person interactions. What we see is kind of a recipe of disaster for people to feel lonely and people to feel less alike and more different, right? So we start to see like just heavy, heavy comparison. And usually, when any client or any teen I know is heavily comparing, it's never I'm better than, it's usually then I'm worse than, I'm uglier than, I'm fatter than, I'm not as successful than, all of those ways that reinforce shame. And then when there's shame, right, somebody feels bad about who they are, it really makes sense that they'll cope in maladaptive ways that are self-destructive because they don't like themselves very much. So why wouldn't they seek for something that's self-destructive that gives them temporary relief, right? A temporary dopamine hit, but isn't a long-term solution. But that also the teenage brain isn't thinking about the long-term solution. That's just not how it works. So if a parent goes to them and starts talking about, their future and down the line, it's like it's a little kind of like it's a misattunement to usually what a teenager needs, because that's not usually what they're thinking of. Unless they might be like a perfectionistic, overachieving kid where that's all they fixate on. And then that's probably not the move either, because that's just going to spike their anxiety. Um, so in 2021, 42% of adolescents reported feelings of sadness and hopelessness, which was up from 28% in 2011. 65% of parents believe that being a teenager today is harder due to technology related factors, um, which is interesting because I'll just point this out. When I talk about tools for parents, a lot of what I'll see parents do sometimes is get on their soapbox and they'll be talking at a kid instead of having a conversation with. And usually they'll start with trying to relate to a kid about when they were a teenager, and the world is nothing like what it was when a parent was a teenager. It's radically different from even when I was a teenager. And I like to think of myself as like not that old enough to have kids. I have two kids, right? But smartphones didn't exist when I was in high school. I remember smartphones came on the scene when I was in college. Facebook was like the platform that was popular when I was in college. And now if you tell a teenager you use Facebook, they look at you like you're crazy. So it's like parents can recognize that it's much harder to be a teenager today, but sometimes when they talk to their kids, they try to relate through their experience, and it doesn't really work well because the world is so different. So the experiences are different. 44% of teens feel that life is more challenging now, with social media contributing to stress and pressure to conform. Um, I think a lot of teenagers know how harmful social media is. Um, but I don't think they recognize sort of like, what are the strategies to learn how to disconnect? How can I create boundaries? What would that look like? And it's engineered to be addictive. So for somebody that is developing their prefrontal cortex that doesn't necessarily have higher cognitive functioning and reasoning online yet, it's really easy to get like looped up in the dopamine cycle that a TikTok reel that repeats every 7 seconds that gets you hooked every time and feeds you information that you're going to want to look at, is something that you get sucked into. So, you know, it's kind of this weird thing that I experience where it's like a lot of my clients identify that it's stressful and it's harmful, but then using that insight to create meaningful action, like that's the bridge that's difficult for them to cross. Um, I don't think I could probably be on a program for Kim without talking about substance use. So I do want to point out that this graph is, you know, among people ages 12 and older. So it's not just only adolescents, but I kind of liked that because, like I said, when we talk about parenting tools, parenting techniques, it's really important to look at your own relationship with things and how that might be communicating things to your kid. Oftentimes, when we have a kid that struggles with substance misuse, there's substance misuse in the home as well. And so, you know, a lot of times teenagers will point out the hypocritical nature of do what I say, but not what I do. So if we look at this, it's an interesting chart because I do think like the opioid epidemic gets a lot of press. But if we look at the most common used substances, right, that have been initiated and in the past years from 2023 forward, it's like it's vaping, it's nicotine, right? It's alcohol and it's marijuana. And those are like the dominant ones, right? And if we look at when we talk about implications of access, nicotine vaping, ton of access, right? Marijuana, ton of access, alcohol, ton of access, because they've become more and more normalized as a society. And there's a lot of misinformation out there. And because it's easy to get, a lot of kids will try these substances. And sometimes they don't even know what they were getting. I was talking to a client today, and he was telling me about the first time he had used marijuana, and he thought he was buying a nicotine vape, and it was actually a marijuana vape. And then he said, you know, he used it and he liked the way that he felt. And that was it. So a lot of times when there's access and there's ways for clients, teenagers to, you know, get these substances, it's easier for them to become addicted, especially because we're in this culture of distractions where their dopamine reward system's already probably been hijacked to some regards. So seeking another dopamine hit through something else usually does something for them if they've already kind of been hardwired to get like a quick fix from something else. So, you know, I talked a lot about dopamine culture. Dopamine Nation is a book that I recommend really consistently to a lot of parents and a lot of clients. But I thought this was like an really interesting infographic to look at, right? And so if we look at these categories on the left, we've got like athletics, journalism, video, music, images, communication, and relationships. And if we look at sort of like where they were at one time, then where they got to and where we're at now, you can see how there's been this shift to a dopamine culture. So with athletics, right, it was like play a sport, then it was watch a sport, and now it's gamble on a sport. With journalism, it was newspapers, then it was multimedia, and now it's clickbait, right? So it's like, what catches my eye and how do I click on it and how do things get fed to me that I kind of end up in these I just call them these like wormholes. I've been in one myself. I've had to put boundaries around technology for myself, especially as a parent with young kids, right? Because I want to be present. And I also like have some things on my phone because I need them, you know, like my work email, or I need a LinkedIn for my professional business. But then watching my behaviors with it, because like I'm just as susceptible as everybody else to being like looped into this algorithm that then keeps me hooked, or having these alerts on my phone that creates a distraction. With video, you had film TV, then you had video, and now we have reels of short videos. I also was talking recently with a colleague about how like the streaming services have changed everything. I mean, back in the day when people would watch TV, we would have to like sit through a commercial. And so like even in sitting through a commercial, when we talk about like the distress tolerance, and like the lack of instant gratification, a lot of it was just built into the way that society was. And now it's like anytime I want to watch anything, right? Like I go and I pick something from a streaming service and it's right there at my fingertips. When I want to buy something, I just like go to Amazon Prime and it's like a 1 day delivery. And so everything has kind of gotten more like leaning towards the instant gratification. When we talk about music, right? It was albums, it was tracks, it was burning CDs. Now we have TikToks. With images, it was like view on a gallery wall, view on your phone. Now it's just scroll on a phone. It's interesting. Like with my kids, they're younger, as I mentioned, and they do like picture days at school. And then you get like, the same envelope with the same prints, and then you get to decide if you want to order them. And I have an iPhone, and I'm like, well, my pictures on my iPhone are just as good as the school picture, and these school pictures are expensive. So like, why would I do that? So even stuff like that has just changed so drastically. As when I was younger, it was like they ordered the wallet size pictures and they were sent out to all the family members. But now it's like if I want a good picture of my kid, I can just use portrait mode and I can get it and I can send it out to everybody like that. Communication, handwritten letters, then voice, email, memo, and now it's short text. For the adolescent population, a lot of them primarily communicate on Snapchat. They make calls on Snapchat, they text on Snapchat. That is the mode that they use. Even though their smartphone does all of these things, they tend to rely heavily on Snapchat as the platform to communicate. And then relationships, right? Like there was courtship, marriage, then some sexual freedom as like we started to move the needle with like the spectrum of sexuality. And now it's swipe on an app. So we contend with where we're at with the young adult population. But even with like 18-year-olds and 17-year-olds can get on these platforms too. They just have to lie when they do the screening, right? It's Tinder, it's Hinge, it's all of these things where I get to constantly judge people and be judged myself. And then when I match, I get to hide behind a screen, and then I get to, be somebody that maybe I am, maybe I'm not. And it's all sort of this like illusion of connection that is not that. And then what we're seeing is like social skills are like really lagged. Like with our population with the young adult, and we do take 17 and 18, it's interesting. A lot of them don't even know how to make friends anymore. And so like, a lot of our milieu will have like their childhood friends, but then as they start to go off and try to make, you know, a life at college, right? Like let's say they went through high school and then they go to college. It's like when they get to college, they start to isolate, avoid, and hide and do all these things because they don't really know how to make new friends. They knew how to make friends when they were put in a group of friends by their parents when they were younger. But now when they have to actually execute that skill, they don't actually have it because they stopped developing it. So, when we talk about dopamine and we talk about like the 21st century teen, it's really important to know that like the adolescent brain's heightened sensitivity to dopamine means that excessive stimulation, whether from substances, digital media, gambling, sex, pornography, gaming. I don't think we talk about pornography a lot, but that's like another one that the access is just pretty overwhelming right now. But it can have lasting effects, right? So overactivation of dopamine pathways may alter receptor function. And this leads to increased compulsive behaviors, reduced ability to experience pleasure from natural rewards, right? And a natural reward could be like going to the gym or going outside and going on a hike, or, some of these things that like have a delayed gratification and don't give me an instant boost, but are natural ways to develop some dopamine. So, what can parents do? because that was kind of like a lot of information to dump on people. And I don't think it's like hopeless or too complicated. I just think we have to continue to evolve. And continuing to evolve doesn't mean controlling everything and taking away all access. You tend to set somebody up for failure with that, because then when they do have access, right, and they do have the ability to choose, a lot of times they can go to another extreme. I also think it can set kids up to lie, and do things behind parents' back, because there's not sort of this like open communication with allowing somebody to choose, knowing that there might be some risk in that. But I always tell parents, like, failure is just feedback. And I think like adolescence is a time for trial and error and boundary pushing and all of these things. So, as a parent, it's like, it's not, we want to resort to like no access, all control, fear-based parenting. That isn't effective. It's more, how can we meet our loved one where they're at with appropriate boundaries, appropriate agency that they can exercise, and consistency. So one thing is like, monitor and moderate exposure. So encouraging balanced use of digital devices, and being vigilant about potential substance use. Setting boundaries can help prevent overstimulation of the dopamine system. So this could look like phone-free zones, like spending quality time together as a family. And when you do, like, one of the things I've done with some of my families before is like there's like a no phone zone, right? Or like, hey, we're gonna like enjoy time together, not using a screen. So whether that's like a video game, a movie, a phone, taking sort of like a step away from that, but a step into quality time together. It can also look like not having video game devices in bedrooms, which can be like a hard battle, but having it more in like family spaces. So, a teenager can't just resort to hiding in their room, play video games all night, disrupt their sleep schedule when they need the most sleep. Developmentally, they need the most sleep, right? Other than like a newborn baby. But knowing that, like, if they don't have the ability to step away from something, kind of taking it out of the space where it makes it easy for them to just overindulge. Promoting healthy activities. So finding out what like your kid likes to do and helping them engage in those activities. And sometimes this is harder than other things, but that's a lot of what we do too, right? Like when a kid gets sober, we're trying to figure out like, what do you like to do? And how do we get you involved? Because like, if you don't have fun and you don't enjoy your life, of course, the thing that was providing relief and a dopamine hit is going to seem like something you want to do, even if it's harmful. And so it's like getting them to try different things. And I always tell parents, like, do it with them. It's not like trying to like set all these things up for them. It's like being involved, asking them what they like to do, taking them to do things. It's like, if it's physical exercise and they don't want to go to the gym, maybe it's like finding out what they want to do and like going on a bike ride with them on a trail. Maybe it's like they'd try out rock climbing. So it's like go to the rock climbing gym with them. Helping them develop hobbies and ways for more social interaction in person, because that naturally boosts dopamine levels without the adverse effects associated with all the artificial stimulants. So like I always say, there's like this whole bucket of like cheap dopamine hits, and then there's this other bucket of healthy dopamine hits. And it's like, can we start to engage more in those so people get dopamine, right? Because that's what leads to like happiness, and feeling less hopeless, which, if we remember that statistic, there's an alarming amount of teens that feel hopeless right now. And kind of guiding them in that way. And it's a lot of it's like not taking no for an answer, right? And not in a way where like parents force their agenda, but like thinking outside the box. And like if somebody doesn't know what they like to do, like creatively thinking of the things they can try, or finding stuff in your local community that's going on that like maybe they'd go attend with you, if it's something creative, if it's I was at a plant store today and I was thinking about some of the clients, and you could go make your own pot. It was like a thing that they offered at this store. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I can think of a handful of people that are in our milieu that would actually like to do that. So it's a lot of that. It's not forcing your agenda, it's creatively helping them explore these areas that will help naturally boost dopamine levels. It's educating them on dopamine's role, right? But not from like a teenagers hate when you talk to them from a soapbox and you lecture them. And if you're a parent and you watch their nonverbal cues, you can generally see when that's happening. I've been in so many family sessions where that started to happen. And I've, gently and compassionately pointed out to the parent to look at their kid and ask them, do you think they're listening right now? Because if you just go on and they're not listening, it's not working anyway. So it's having an open conversation while informing your teenager about certain behaviors, how substances can affect their brain, and empowering them to make informed decisions. So once again, it's not forcing your agenda, it's trying to set them up to make decisions for themselves and help them with information. And like if they're not receptive to it, like I think that's okay, but I think creating spaces where the conversation can occur. And this doesn't look like sending your kids articles through text messages that you find and hoping that they read them and then becoming resentful if they don't, right? Like I've seen a lot of parents do that. It looks like having a conversation about things and finding a way to engage them, similar to like how a teacher has to do, right? Like learning how to educate them in a way where they're interested or they have a seat at the table and they're having a dialogue with you. It's modeling healthy habits. I've touched on this a lot, but it's kind of one of the things that, in my opinion, is the most impactful that there's a lot of resistance to. Which I get, right? Like I think parents are stressed too. I have a lot of compassion for parents because it's not an easy time to raise a teen, right? It's not an easy time to raise kids. We know that. There's a reduced sense of community, belonging, connection, which just as important for parents as it is for teens. But if you can be honest with yourself and assess your relationship with technology, assess your relationship with substances, assess your relationship with these things that you utilize for distractions and show them rather than tell them. So it's a do what I do, end what I say. Overall, if you create a trusting environment, right? So it's kind of like where I said, like invite them to have a seat at the table. Encouraging honest discussions by listening without immediate judgment or criticism. That's really important. It's like if you want your teen to be honest with you, stepping away from being the judge or the critic is really important. And a lot of that is hardwired into us from our own experiences as humans. So it's actually harder than you think it is to do that. It's kind of getting at the level that the teenager is at. So it's like not telling them that their decisions are stupid or the person they follow on social media is ridiculous or any of these things, even if that's what you think. It's exploring like, well, why is that the person that you follow on social media? Why does that person make sense to you, right? Or it's like, okay, so why is that your opinion about substances? Why do you think marijuana is not harmful? Why do you think it helps anxiety? So it's creating this open dialogue through like curiosity and compassion and asking questions without judgment and criticism. And that's a much easier way to get them to be honest. They still might lie, and that's okay too. It's not excusing the dishonesty. It's just knowing that, like, developmentally during teenage years, they're like trying to figure out how to navigate relationships. And so sometimes some of these behaviors that show up that are really difficult for parents to deal with, it's really just them trying to figure out, like, how do I navigate things? And if they've got a lot of shame, like if they don't feel good about themselves, usually there's a lot of hiding and dishonesty in that. And it's not because like they're a bad person, it's because they think they are. So they hide from the world. So the less you can kind of come at it from like a judgmental stance, the better you'll be relationally with your teen. Engage in shared activities, participate in your teen's interests to facilitate natural conversations. I've seen some parents do some really cool things over the years. I've seen parents go to like crazy concerts that I like never thought they would go to because their kid wanted to go and they wanted to share the experience with them. I've seen parents get outside of their comfort zone to really do something that their kid wants to do, even if it's not really sort of like in their wheelhouse. So it's doing that. It's allowing age appropriate autonomy. This is really important for all the parents that are like, how's my kid going to launch? It's like, if you don't teach them how to start making decisions by allowing them to make decisions for them to build confidence and responsibility, it's a lot of pressure when all of a sudden you're like independently living to be able to do that and to do it well. So like I always tell families, it's age appropriate. So it's like, you don't want to treat your 18-year-old like they're 13 and you don't want to treat your 13-year-old like they're 18. That's a big developmental gap. But it is giving them some autonomy and some agency, because a lot of times, like especially in the 21st century, the teenager's fighting you for control. So learning how to kind of step out of that control battle and that power dynamic by offering them autonomy and agency in appropriate ways can really help ease some of those dynamics. Which leads to like teaching natural consequences, right? So like let them experience the outcomes of their choices to promote learning and accountability. This is like really important. Like the only way that failure provides feedback is if they experience the consequences of their choices. And it's harder to allow than I think a lot of parents think, when the fear and the anxiety, and I can't tell you how many times a parent has like said to me, like, well, how is this going to impact their future? Or they're not going to be able to get into this college or that. And well, maybe not, I don't know. But if they don't learn this lesson, they're going to continue to make similar decisions, in my opinion, right? And it's balancing this supervision with trust, right? So it's allowing personal space while staying aware of their activities and peer relationships. So it's not helicopter parenting, right? It's also not let them do whatever they want. Let them use substances in the house, let them play games all day, let them not go to school, let them not, let them avoid, isolate, like all this stuff. But it is sort of like allowing them to have space while intervening when you need to. And I've talked and hear a lot about like kind of these different stages of parenting. And at one point, like you were responsible totally for taking care of your kid, right? Like they were dependent on you. And when we get into this adolescent stage, there's this transition that needs to occur, right? Where it's like, it's not dependent, it's not controlling, it's not the parent making all the decisions and the parent's doing everything. It's also not the flip side of that either, that the teenager is doing that. It's somewhere in the middle, and like figuring out that dance is really challenging, and nobody gives you a rule book and nobody tells you exactly how to do it, and nobody tells you like when it's supposed to occur, because every kid is different, right? There's different challenges, there's different developmental delays, there's different things that occur, there's different experiences that they have relationally. The kid that maybe went through like a really difficult divorce when he was little, and experienced a lot of kind of like disruption to nobody's fault, they might have more developmental implications than a child that might have not experienced that. A child that was like extensively bullied, they might show up radically different when they're like 13 than somebody that didn't experience that. A kid that had like a horrific car crash, right? When they were younger. Just there's all these things that we experience as humans that like can dictate what a kid needs at different ages. So a lot of times when we talk about clients, we don't say like what is their age, we say like what's their developmental age. So where realistically are they at developmentally, and then we strategically intervene based on that. So, I'll kind of like end with this, and then I think there's some questions, and me and Kim kind of have a conversation. We like to do that, but I often think like teenagers are not problems to be solved, but they're individuals to be understood, and they're typically their behaviors, right, present in a way that can create stress for parenting dynamics and family systems. But if we look beyond the behavior and see the behavior just as a symptom, not the root cause, usually we can get to a place where like we see them, we can have conversations with them, some of the interventions are easier because developing trust is the way to help somebody that is like set up in this culture for distraction, for access, for all of these things we talked about tonight. It's like we can't really help anybody if we start from a place of telling them who they are, telling them what they should do, and then telling them about our experience that was radically different than theirs, instead of like being curious, compassionate, asking them questions and using that as a starting point. So I think I'm going to stop sharing there. And then Kim, if you maybe want to, I know we have quite a few questions, and then I think some chats came through as well.
Thank you so much, Lizzy. That was terrific. Second, let me see. Yeah, I got that. And I want to invite Dr. Lutz to join in on this conversation as well. And so, Dr. Lutz, if you wanted to, share any thoughts that you have about what Lizzy just talked about or what you've experienced.
Sure. Thanks, Lizzy, for your presentation. I think you hit the nail on the head of what we hear parents sharing with us, what we hear students sharing with us, what I see, like you, I think we can all stumble down that social media, rabbit hole of you watch one video and the next thing you know, 3 hours have gone by. And as adults, I think it's maybe a little bit easier because of our responsibilities to get up and move on. And for students, it can consume their whole night. And so I know we have some really great questions that people had asked prior to the presentation. And then we have a couple of things in our chat as well. So I don't know, Kim, do you want me to jump in?
I'd like to ask the question that was asked live. We'll get to the advanced questions as well, but is there a specific, early on, Lizzy, you were talking about the obsessive use of digital technology and social media and all that. The question was, is there a specific type of memory that seems to be most impaired by excessive digital media consumption?
Oh, probably. I mean, this is where I'm not a scientist, you know.
That question. It's a great question.
Chat GPT is a great place to ask this question. No, yeah, I mean, memory is definitely impacted because I think if we look at attention span, right? So I would assume, but I don't know this for sure, it's short-term memory, similar to what we see with substance use. And I think if we look at a lot of these things that people are using to get outside of themselves or for relief or dopamine, that is typically where we see memory deficits. It's with short-term memory. But, I don't know specifically. Maybe Dr. Lutz, maybe you do. I don't know.
I was going with short-term memory too, just because I think that's what we see the most frequently with students. You're right. Their attention span drops significantly. It makes it really hard to pay attention for longer periods of time when you're used to what I call like the TikTok, 10-second short film. It's really hard to even pay attention when something is a minute or 10 minutes and to engage in that work.
And I think there's so much what we hear people say is like, oh, they're all such great multitaskers. And there really is not such a thing as multitasking, right?
No, and it was interesting where I was looking at some of these statistics from the research articles when I made the presentation is it was also talking about the adult working population and this idea of multitasking. And what you see is actually productivity is like decreasing at a rapid rate because of the task switching that we do. That's actually a really ineffective use of like our energy, like our brain energy. And so I think we see this everywhere where it's like, no, it's not a bunch of great multitaskers, it's task switching, and that's different.
Right.
And Chat GPT for the win. Transactive memory is most affected. That's the way our brain divides information and decides where to store it.
Interesting. Thank you.
Yep.
So a question just came in just directly to me, but I'll ask each of you as well. How are you seeing this impacting during the school day? And this would be, I think, for you, Dr. Lutz, when they don't have access to the devices during the day, attention span, focus, etc. But actually, they do have access to the devices during the day.
Correct. So they do. Our students have access to their Chromebooks. I think where you see it come through is that, students will either rush through their work to get to personal time on the Chromebook, or they don't complete their work in order to, move on to something on the Chromebook. As you know, we as a district looked really hard at student both cell phone use and Chromebook use. And so we've been building into our days more opportunities for students to be device free, while also recognizing that devices are kind of how we get things done in today's world. There's very few workplaces that don't use some type of device. So, it's the push and pull of how do we train kids how to appropriately use the device, but then also set some guide rails so that, they're not constantly chatting with friends, scrolling social media, things like that. Social media is blocked in our schools. Our middle schoolers can't have their cell phones on them. That's not to say that there aren't students who break the rules. Same as any rule. We know that students are using them. Our biggest thing is we encourage the students to put it in their locker. And at the high school, they're supposed to put them in the cell phone carousels when they walk into the classroom. It has helped. We've heard some really great feedback from our student groups that have shared that they didn't realize how addicted they were until they had to put their cell phones into this pouch, and they were literally jonesing for it, right? Like, oh, what if my notification goes off? And that does start to wear down for most of our students if they continue to do it. And somebody said, are students allowed to bring card games, board games to play during their lunchtime? Absolutely. We have some students, they either go into the library, they sit in the cafeteria. If you're at the high school during lunch and learn, you can find students in almost every corner of that building doing different things, whether it's playing guitar, playing card games. There are some board games, completing work, things like that.
I will say, to kind of like mirror what you're saying, we've had a lot of conversations about cell phone use in our program as well. And we've floated a lot of ideas because we stay stuck in this world too, where it's like teaching them how to use it more appropriately because they have to navigate the world. And we need them to have it. We do things like Life 360, stuff like that. So it's been interesting to try to navigate and to throw different ideas out there, so we do the kind of same, we have structured time where they're not allowed to access certain things, and that's how we've navigated it as well. But like that push-pull dynamic that you talked about, it's so hard, right? Because we live in a world where it exists. So to take it all away doesn't actually teach a skill.
Right.
Yeah. Right. So much of what we talk about with process addictions are things that are in our life that we need to not use maladaptively, right? So that, how do we foster that moderation? And I think you talked about this a little bit, Lizzy, with like sitting down with them and looking at screen time. And I think that if you probably ask a young person, how many hours do you think you're on? How many do you think you want to be on? I have to believe, and you two would know far better than I, that they don't want to be on it as much as they probably are. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Phones, probably. Social media, video games, kind of a different story for us, I would say. And some video game things, it's more like when releases of things come out. So you'll see the way they're engineered for dopamine is interesting because people have to level up and do all these things. What I have found helpful in screen time reports is accessing it and then multiplying it out. So showing them through like an activity rather than just telling them what this looks like multiplied out for the amount of time and years that they're going to spend on their phone. So I usually do an activity where I'll ask them like, when did they get a phone? Then I'll have them pull up a screen time report and I'll use that timeline to show them what we're looking at. And when I'm doing that intervention, I'm telling you like the answer is usually years that they're going to spend on their device if they continue those habits up.
And somebody that's me again directly for you, Lizzy. How do you help your clients at Synergy to get off their phones? I know you talked about this a little bit, but anything else you want to share about how you do you just take them, or do you like, how does this work?
When we're in group, we take them. We try different things, but we found that it was just easier. And then in housing, there's structured time where they're not supposed to be on the phones, but we don't necessarily take them. But then there are select clients where you talked about cross addictions, Kim, where because the cross addiction is so intense, whether it's the video game or the phone, we will put more restricted time in where they have to turn in their phone during certain times a day, and then we'll give it back. So and these, because like when we talk about addiction, we have to look at like progression. And so if somebody is like severely addicted, right? It's harder for them to implement a strategy to hold themselves accountable. And so doing some of that stuff, but not from I always tread lightly, right? Like not from a control fear-based way, more of like, how can I help you develop this? So we will create more like restrictions in that way for a handful of clients where we really think that that's disrupting their mental well-being.
This is a great question. I think that we got it in advance. How to react if a child begins sneaking behind parents' back. Context: we did not allow our child to download a certain social media platform and had several conversations about it. Then randomly she was caught with the app on her phone and had downloaded without our knowledge. The child immediately apologized, but trust was broken. I think this is such a question that comes up whether we're talking about substance use or this kind of behaviors and things. We don't want to drive our child further underground with the hypervigilance, or not even just vigilance, right? Where do you find that balance of you want them to be accountable, you want to call them out when we see disconcerting behaviors, but we don't want them to if they're at a point where they're so dependent on this that they're just going to find a better way to keep it from us.
I mean, that's like the problem, right? I think like the part that sticks out to me in that question is, how do we react? And my first thought is, how do you respond? And responding and reacting are very different from a parenting lens. When I'm reacting, it's usually emotional. And when I'm responding, it's usually more thoughtful. I'm regulated going into it. I'm not taking it personally. And these things sound simple, but like I always tell parents, like I'm a parent, like they're not in real time, like when the anger is triggered and you feel like we had all these conversations with her, I cannot believe she's doing this, right? It's actually really easy to react. And so it's like, it's usually taking a moment, because like really how you react to that is with like loving kindness, compassion, and accountability. Right. So it's this non-judgmental response to a behavior, because what Kim's talking about is really like, if you want to teach your kid how to manipulate better, you react big and you drive them further underground and they just start hiding more. And so some of the clients that I think manipulation gets a bad rap. I see it as a survival technique for something that they want to protect. So that's kind of my definition. And some of the clients that we have that are like really good at it, it's because they came from these really reactive systems where it wasn't safe to be honest emotionally. So then they got better at hiding. So it's creating accountability. It's having conversations. She apologized immediately. I think like, okay, but like then watch the behavior, right? Like kind of like the monitor thing I talked about, like kind of be on the lookout, but not from like a helicopter control. You just realize that like, okay, this is a thing. So I'm not going to deny that like these behaviors might not continue to persist. How do I create accountability around it? What does that look like? Because long story short, it's sort of like Dr. Lutz said, like there's that, I always think like stereotypical sayings in our society are funny when they're like, true a lot of the time. And it's like, rules were made to be broken. A lot of teenagers follow that sort of saying. And so it's not overreacting when it happens. It's like, it's just coming to the table, having conversation, and then creating accountability. And accountability, I tell parents, it's like, it's not control. That's not what it is. It's accountability, which over time should restore trust if a teen is being accountable to the systems and the boundaries that are put in place.
Awesome.
And somebody sent a direct message to me saying, how do we as parents work with the schools? What's the collective campaign that we should support? And I always appreciate that question because as a school district, we always want to partner with parents. It's the most effective way of making sure, we always talk about that if you're at home and you split up mommy and daddy and you go to one and the other and ask your question and you get two different answers, you've got everybody over a barrel. And that's kind of the same thing when we work with parents. So I would say, working with the schools between parents, the most effective thing that we can do is be on the same page about specifically the cell phone use. And, I think a lot of times teenagers especially have a tendency to come home, but mom, dad, everybody's doing it. Everybody has their cell phone. If I had a nickel for every time I heard everybody, right, I would be incredibly wealthy. Everybody is not doing it. Don't believe your kids. And so it's really important that you enforce at home, whatever parameters that the school has put in place for those cell phones. Make sure you're not inadvertently not reinforcing that by saying something like, oh, well, just keep your cell phone on you today because you're not feeling well and text me if your headache gets too bad, right? You're giving your child explicit permission to carry around their cell phone. And like you heard Lizzy just talk about, a lot of times, the teenagers then say, well, that rule was made to be broken. My boyfriend's going to chat me today. And so I have to be available. I'll just keep my cell phone on me for that too. And so it's really important. You can always call the nurse. You can always call an administrator if you need to get a hold of your child. But making sure that you reinforce whatever that rule is, your child's following that so that, they're not part of that everybody that's breaking the rule.
Yeah. We also see that with substance use. I don't know, Kim, you're going to chime in. It's like everybody smokes marijuana. No, they don't.
Nope.
Statistically, if you look at the stats, no, you don't. While there's been an increase in usage, no, they don't,
Right. Yeah, those are the exact words that my son said to me when he was still using, and I almost believed him, because he was so convinced. I think he believed it. I think I don't think he was trying to snow me. I think he absolutely, because of course he built a community that validated his use and supported, so he didn't have to feel that he was the outlier. That this just made him feel, that yeah, and it's that minimizing thing too. So. Here's a question that is direct to me, but it's for you guys. It's a two-part. What age is appropriate for teen to have social media? Our 14-year-old was given an Apple Watch for communication, but she got an old phone from her older brother. We found the phone with multiple social media accounts, so she went underground and lied. Trust broken, and now we are rebuilding. Comments?
I mean, social media is tough. I do think you fare a lot better if you wait till 16, 17 to get on. I do think that's challenging. But what I have seen is just even in my practice over the years is 13 and 14 is radically different than 16 and 17. Neither are fully developed, but just the susceptibility of a 13 and 14-year-old on some of those online platforms is pretty high in my opinion. I don't have any research to back that up. This is just an opinion, so I want to state that for the record.
I'm with you on that. I don't have a magic age because I think I go back to every child is different. Some kids get social media and they truly use it for, the purpose of having a group chat to find out when baseball practice is, right? Other kids get on it, and the next thing you know, they're making videos of, their peers in inappropriate situations and posting it, and it's out of control, and they don't realize the reach, and they don't realize the back end because you're anonymous, your brain's not formed, you're not thinking through all these things. So I don't have a magic age. I'm with Lizzy, the older the better. I think that helps kind of facilitate that making better decisions. But I also know that there's a lot of kids that sneak around, and even when you think that you've locked down that phone and you think that you found every way to keep social media off of it, these kids are digital natives. They know how to work around a system like nobody's business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting just the sibling dynamic thing. We all like I'm just kind of like we see this also as substance use is a lot of time access and first time use can come from an older sibling having access. And so just recognizing if you do have, more than one kid in a family system, that some of those conversations that we were talking about with transparency and openness, openness you can have with your older kid about the implications of like giving access to a younger sibling some of this stuff, because I think a lot of times like the older siblings just trying to be like a cool older sibling. I don't think they think through that decision either. And so, they're like, oh, they want a cell phone, I'll just like this one I don't use anymore, I'll give it to her, not thinking sort of like down the line, because that's not how their brain works once again.
Yeah. One of our very wise counselors just wrote to me and reminded me about a national movement. It's called Wait Until Eighth, which really speaks to that, age 13 and above, for getting a cell phone. I'm going to drop them in the chat. It's a really great website. We've used them before. We've shared this with parents. They have done a lot of research. And so I put that in if you're interested in that. I know how hard it can be. Parent pressure is just as hard as peer pressure sometimes. So I get that, but this at least gives you a resource to help you with that.
I see that somebody mentioned the anxious generation. I was going to say, I'm wondering if Wait Until Eighth came from Jonathan Haidt's Anxious Generation book, because that is his, admonition to our country. And certainly, I think it was Australia that just recently banned all mobile devices under the age of something. I can't remember what the age was, 14, 15, I don't know what it was, but the whole nation made this like blanket agreement, which is amazing, but we're not there obviously, but I love that concept. And I'm glad you mentioned that book as well. And I did put the link for Dopamine Nation in there, also a huge Anna Lemke fan. Here's a discussion prompt for us to feel free to answer other questions first. That's okay, we're good. I love the concept of adding in quality time and activities rather than removing screen time. I do as well. It seems like pure removal might create a vacuum that could cause more problems than it solves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's where usually when it's pure removal, it's more like control and fear based. And like I said, when there's safety concerns and things like that, I'm not saying like don't limit or restrict or stuff, but we often say at our program, like we're a step down program usually from a residential level of care, and what we'll say is like we're not a program that enjoys taking things away, we're a program that wants to add things in. And so it's the same concept there. If I can add things in to improve the quality of somebody's life, their desire to seek these like cheap quick dopamine hits like I talk will diminish over time, because they'll start to enjoy these other things. It is a trial and error process though, because usually somebody who's had their dopamine system hijacked, like the first time you go do something with them that, back before that happened would create enjoyment, it might not, because it's not going to give them that level of a dopamine hit that they're used to. So, I adding in, and also me like continue to try. So it's like, don't just do it once. And if the report is like, be like, well, that didn't work. That might just tell you kind of where they're at with things, and then try something else, like think outside the box and be creative.
Lizzy, I loved your table, The Rise of Dopamine Culture. I absolutely love that. It's beautiful. And it's so, it's a little scary, when I see the right column there, like where we are today. And I think probably the older you are, which I'm probably the senior member of this Zoom meeting, but and hey, I'm all about technology. I've been riding this wave along with everybody else, but I worry about, kind of how this plays out in the long term for people. We just don't know, like so many things have happened so quickly in the last decade that we just don't know longitudinally, like what COVID is going to be, the long-term impacts, what that kind of isolation looks like, and all this different social media aspects and the way we gather news or consume news, that's not really news. It's just, um, can we talk about some efforts that you're seeing? Maybe Dr. Letts, this is for you too, especially, but like to bring mindfulness into a young person's life, because if our brains are, when we're so young, that malleable, fresh, slate of like, teach me things, right? That's the beauty. It's that double-edged sword of like, it puts us at greater risk when we're really young for maladaptive things, but it really opens us up to learning language. And I loved what I just heard somebody say, that when we are all born with the ability to roll our R's, like to do that, and depending on the language that you speak, if you use that in your language, you'll keep that ability. But if you don't, it gets pruned. Like there's all this pruning that goes on in our brains, and it's kind of an interesting way to think about the things that we, you lose it, use it or lose it. Basically, as your brain is developing. So what are the things that we can say, hey, look, you guys are so lucky. You're apt, you're so able to learn language, sports, musical instruments, things like that, than an older person is. Let's teach you some really great ways to build resilience, to know how to cope with stress in a healthy way that is sustainable. That's not going to be a quick fix. So can either of you talk about like what you're seeing? And Lizzie, I know you have young children. Are these things that you're employing? And Dr. Lutz, like, what are you seeing educationally in that world?
Okay, I'll go first. I was like, I don't know which one to go first. Yeah, yes and yes. So I think like my kind of like favorite thing about the field and like parenting books now that are getting a lot of, I think of like the whole brain child. I think of like Dan Siegel, some of these like pioneers in the field is recognizing the impact of the nervous system. And if we can actually attune to the nervous system when it's activated, dysregulated, instead of trying to talk to people, we can actually create sort of the response emotionally that we're looking for. So it's like kind of the movement with like gentle parenting, which like once again is like hard because we want to look at behaviors and we want to address the behaviors, but they're the symptom, they're not the root. And so if we can start to, the word, and people can look this up, I always say like attune. If we can attune to our clients or my young kids, we generally get a lot further with teaching them the skill if we can make them feel safe first, by using actually like our own nervous system, right? And some of the fascinating science between co-regulation, I mean, you see it with animals. Like I always tell people, like an animal, like a dog comes up to you when you're sad because they know, because they have a nervous system, because they feel our nervous system. So, with the mindfulness, I think in my field specifically, it's more focused on nervous system interventions, which is somatic, right? Like the body sensations. And with a lot of the parent, it's like, it's really interesting, the parallels, right? Because like what we're seeing in addictions and mental health is like all of these dysregulated kids. Right. And a lot of these dysregulated kids, good, bad, or indifferent. And I think the books back then were like telling parents to do this, were like behavioral compliance modes of interventions, right? Like the timeouts and stuff like that. And what it does is it doesn't actually set up a person to learn how to emotionally regulate, right? So like it kind of all connects with me because I have a 5 and a 4-year-old, and my parenting style has drastically shifted from some of the books and some of the people I'm talking about to this nervous system approach, which is also where the substance use field is going. A lot of the theories and the things that people are developing in real time. And Kim, before everybody signed on, we were talking about this presenter who is a chief clinical officer at a treatment program down in Florida, and that's his whole thing. Like he talks about like a lot of like nervous system healing. And how when we do that and we teach people to, I always say it's the same thing I'm doing with my kids and my clients, but like befriend your nervous system rather than just trying to think your way out of it. You just get a lot further. Yeah.
Yeah. I would agree. I think that there's been a lot of work in schools around mindfulness. We use responsive classroom in our younger grades, just being attuned to your feelings, to the feelings of others around you, showing empathy, and making sure that you take time for yourself. I think that that's something that we lost somewhere along the way in like our hurry up and go society. But bringing back like those mindful moments of deep breathing, taking a walk when needed, and really helping kids see like, what do you need right now to help like address your, you're on fire. That's how you feel. And so that has been some of our work. I know that our counselors work really hard with groups of students to make sure that they're, that they can talk about their feelings, being able to name them, because if you can't name them, there's not much that you can do to address how you're feeling. So that's been some of our work in the schools.
Thank you both. Here's a really tough question for you. Maybe it's not so tough. Any tips for helping build skills to make friends aside from the things we've been talking about? COVID brought about a new shyness and social embarrassment in my household.
Yeah. Making friends is for kids who are really good at it, super easy, right? They can walk into any room and have 5 new best friends that they're leaving. For kids who are more shy, it becomes more difficult. And so one of the things that I would say is that you know, I think it's finding activities that you can get your child involved in, whether that's at the school, whether that is in the community, going to the local library and doing like the story times. Springfield Township does reading to dogs, finding different things that your child is highly interested in, because if they can go to those things, it's easier to make a friend with something that you're already interested in because you have that natural bond and connection. And I think that really does help if you can get your child out and do something, anything with them. We have a lot of after school activities that we offer in all of our grades, and the community also has a lot of great stuff. So
I'm glad you mentioned pets because I do think that's a really great way if a child has especially dogs, I think are a little bit easier to do this with, but like they're walking your dog and people they smile at you if you're walking a dog, like strangers will smile at you. It's just a nice, easy way to kind of break that. But there's another question that just sent to me about how do we encourage our teens to come out of their bedroom?
Well, don't take the door off the hinges. That's my
I've heard
um,
people do that.
yeah, no, we've had a lot of parents do that, and then it just ends like it's kind of like the same strategies. It's like finding stuff they like to do and trying to connect with them over that. It's the same thing you're talking about with the dogs, right? It's like trying to get it paired to something that they enjoy or they're willing to do generally it's I like to say like meet them where they're at more rather than just trying to get them to come out to like spend time in the living room while the family's watching TV. Then there's other strategies, like I said, like a lot of times, like if the video game console's in the room and we're talking video gaming, like require the video game console to be like outside on like a communal TV. So it can be some stuff like that as well. I think like every parent of every teenager everywhere has kind of had this battle to some varying degree. I had this battle with my parents when I was, a teenager of like coming out of my room. So to me, it's more the same thing. It's like trying to add things in to create structure, activities, engagement, rather than just like trying to talk to them and get them to come out.
yeah. I think I learned this from you, Lizzy, in one of your previous sessions, but I'm pretty sure it was you that talked about the best time to talk to your kids is in the car because you're not directly facing them, right? Like, they're kind of distracted. They know that you're kind of distracted. And so, as a parent, I've used that to my advantage. And so I would agree with you. Like, if you can throw a preferred activity, whether it's just a trip to Starbucks that they need to come with you if they want to get that drink, or, their favorite fast food restaurant, or, something as silly as, hey, I think you need new shoes. We got to go to the store. Like anything that you can dangle to them can pull them out of their room. And then once you have them in the car, it's the perfect place for kids to feel like put their guard down and they talk more.
Yeah, and I've seen like really interesting thing happens with kids clients that like I never would have predicted. Like we have like a men's house and um there's like a couple like 17, 18-year-olds right now that are like avid bakers. they like got into baking through spending time with like, we have a chef at our house that prepares a lot of the food for the clients, and he like taught them, and now they like bake banana bread together, and it's really good. And like if I would have met that kid when I met that kid, and he would have told me like he's going to be a baker that bakes banana bread for the house, I would have said no way. You know what I mean? So like that's where I kind of am like, it's trial and error and be creative, because like a lot of times a teenager doesn't know what they like. So it's exposure to these different things, or doing an activity like, yeah, if you want the Starbucks drink, you're going to get in the car and go with me. Things like that. And I think sometimes you'll be pleasantly surprised.
Yeah. And
Look at the
it's
silver
funny you
lining.
said that. Somebody else chimed in and said that they're having their kids help make dinner once a week.
Yeah.
That's perfect.
Yep.
I was just gonna say, look at the silver linings of landing in a recovery house. You learn how to bake banana bread.
Yeah.
Everybody's gonna run out and get their kid to go sign up for sober living. Hey, I'm telling, it is so true. I mean, my son's first year of recovery, when he was living in big group houses with it was like a frat house without any substances, was awesome. He was deep frying turkeys and having a great time, so if anyone has any more questions, we're almost at the end of our time.
I did have one more comment just about like the shyness and the social embarrassment. And not in a corny way. A lot of my kids, like my clients, I shouldn't say kids, not my 5 and 4-year-old, my clients that have really struggled with social skills will role play in session. And really not in this corny way, but if they don't have the social skill development, a lot of times they don't know what to say. They don't know how to carry a conversation. They don't know what questions to ask. So even simply kind of trying to do some role playing with them can help them sometimes when they then expose themselves to a social situation. I've done this with interviews. Like we've had clients that have never been on a job interview, and they like don't know how to answer certain questions. So like I said, like it's an adolescent. So like not in a corny way, like in a just like being a cool adult way. Doing some role playing can really help.
Thank you all so much for being with us. Thank you so much, Dr. Lutz. Wonderful to be with you in the Springfield community.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thanks to Lizzy. We always love it when she does our presentation. She's so knowledgeable. So we really appreciate you. Next in our family information series on March 12th, we'll have our family wellness fair. That is an in-person event. We will have organizations from around the county who will be out and sharing at tables at Enfield starting at 6:30 p.m. And then April 1st, we're joined by Max Stossel for Social Awakening. He's a social media expert, so we're really looking forward to hearing from him. And then we will be back again in May for, as Kim shared, Cannabis Kids and solutions for anxiety with Be Part of the Conversation. So thanks everybody for joining us, and we hope to see you at our next session.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.